I wonder if people can hear the difference in my voice now when I say those words. Years ago, the phrase was light, lifted up by pride. My son, my Daniel, was my joy, my reason for getting out of bed with purpose and energy. I loved not only saying I was his mother, but everything that came with the job. Now, those same two words feel heavier in my mouth, like I need to brace myself just to speak them. Motherhood changes you. It doesn't just carve you into someone new the day your child arrives. It continues its work silently, day after day, through joy and disappointment, pride and pain. Some changes are beautiful. Others take something from you in ways you can't name until years later. I am Sophia, 63 next month. My hair has silver streaks now that I stopped coloring a year ago. When I catch sight of myself in the mirror, I often see my mother in my face, in the shape of my jaw, in the way my eyes soften when I'm lost in thought. But I also see the woman I fought to become over decades, resilient, completely self-made, and still standing after life's storms tried their hardest to flatten me. If you passed me in the street, maybe you'd notice only the polite smile, the careful but steady step, the decent coat well kept despite the years. You wouldn't see the 27 years I ran a small catering business alone, cooking in a kitchen so warm from the ovens in summer that my clothes stuck damp to my skin. You wouldn't see the hundreds of 3 a.m. mornings setting trays into my ancient van for delivery to weddings and conferences. And you would definitely not see the scars left behind after losing my husband, Peter. So suddenly, and then slowly losing my son, Daniel, in a different way. I met Peter when I was 24. He was kind in a steady, unshowy way. The kind of man whose laugh could fill a room. We weren't rich, but we built a life together in a little house, with a garden that he kept neat, and I kept filled with flowers. When Daniel was born, I looked at that tiny, red-faced boy in my arms and thought my world was full to overflowing. We were a strong family, until we weren't. 15 years ago, Peter collapsed at work. Brain aneurysm. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where you think the rest of the day will be perfectly forgettable. By nightfall, I was a widow. Daniel was only 18 then, just starting to figure out the edges of the adult world. At the funeral, he held on to me so tightly, burying his face in my shoulder like he had when he was a boy who'd scraped his knee. And I remember thinking, we will survive this. We'll hold on to each other even harder now. That grief is tricky. It binds some people together. For others, it carves a slow wedge. With Peter gone, the business became my anchor. I threw myself into work with a kind of desperation, catering any event that paid, squeezing every penny until I could breathe without glancing at my bank account in fear. I told myself I was being practical, that Daniel needed financial stability. To feel safe, I paid for his tuition, his rent at school, everything. I cooked in industrial kitchens until my back ached and my hands were red from scrubbing when the dishwasher broke. The routine kept me standing, but it also kept me away from him. We still spoke often at first. He'd call about a good grade or a new friend from his classes. But over time, I noticed the calls were more about needing money than sharing his life. Mum, could you send me a bit extra? Books are expensive. Mom, rent's come due. And my paycheck isn't in yet. Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? Looking back, I can see what was happening. I was paying bills but losing presents. I thought I was shielding him from more pain after losing his father. I didn't see that I was also teaching him that I was the safety net he never had to thank. And then there was Rebecca. The first time Daniel brought her to my house, it had been one of those heavy spring evenings when rain smells like wet pavement and new blossoms. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the kind of comfort meal Peter used to love. I wanted to make her feel welcome. Rebecca walked into my home with perfect posture, her dark hair sleek against her gold earrings, and a glance that swept over my living room in a way that felt less like admiration and more like assessment. The throw pillows, my modest china cabinet, the fading photograph of Peter and Daniel at the beach. All of it seemed to flicker through her gaze before she smiled. It was a polite smile, but distant, like she wanted me to know she was here. For Daniel, not for me. Still, I put in the effort. Over the next year, I invited them for dinners, offered to help when they were setting up their first apartment, brought little gifts just because. But there was always that invisible curtain in the room. Her cold civility, his subtle shift toward her orbit. When they married, I told myself it was just the way of things. A mother taking a small step back so a partner can take a step forward. Visits became infrequent. Sometimes months would pass, but I blamed the busyness of their lives. Then came Emily. Holding my granddaughter for the first time was like feeling sun on my face after a long winter. I thought, this is my second chance. I will be part of her life. I began visiting regularly, bringing casseroles, folding laundry, offering to babysit, so Rebecca could nap or shower. And at first, she accepted the help, although her tone was always clipped. Thank you, that'll be all, clipped. If Emily fussed in my arms, she moved to take her back immediately. If I brought gifts, she'd mutter about how too many presents spoil a child. There were small, stinging moments, Rebecca correcting me about how to hold her. The nurse said not to cradle under the arm, or reminding me not to give Emily sugar when she wasn't even a year old. None of it was worth arguing over. Each incident was a cut so tiny, no one else could see the blood. But over time, you feel all of them. Daniel never contradicted her. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed how the air changed when I was there. Other times, I thought maybe he noticed and chose to ignore it. I learned to stand at careful distance, close enough to be present for Emily, but far enough to avoid Rebecca's barbed politeness. I kept my voice warm, my smile easy, and my opinions tucked away. Over the years, this balancing act became my life, and that was the soil everything grew from. That's where the dinner, and the moment that nearly broke me, began. The phone call caught me off guard. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Soft light spilling in through my kitchen curtains. I had just finished washing the breakfast dishes when my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I smiled automatically. Even now, even after years of a widening gap, that name still stirred something warm in me before reality could cool it. "Hi, Mum," came his voice, casual and pleasant. "Daniel," I said, a little brighter than intended. What a nice surprise. He skipped right past the small talk. Rebecca and I were thinking, how about you come over on Friday night? We'll have dinner here. Just the three of us. I actually froze for a moment, dish towel in hand. I couldn't remember the last time they'd invited me over without it being Emily's birthday or some other obligatory occasion. Usually, it was me reaching out, me arranging, me waiting for them to decide if they could fit me in. "That sounds lovely," I managed, setting the towel on the counter. "Shall I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Daniel said warmly. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And if you want, maybe one of your pies. Rebecca really liked that apple one you made." I couldn't help but smile. "I'll bring one." After we hung up, my mind raced over what to wear. They lived in a modern townhouse now, all neutral tones, stainless steel appliances, and furniture that looked as if it had come directly from a showroom catalogue. Rebecca's taste was impeccable in that sharp, glossy way, but it made me feel conscious of my own choices. The slightly worn but well cared for sofa in my living room, the crocheted blanket over the armrest, the way my home felt lived in, rather than curated. Friday came with a crisp hint of spring, still tangled in winter's chill. I baked the apple tart that morning, coaxing the warm scent of cinnamon and sugar into my kitchen until it felt like old times, back when I cooked simply for the joy of sharing something with people I loved. I laid out my best navy blue sweater, the same one Daniel once said made my eyes stormy blue like his. It still fit, though it hung a bit looser now. Time changes the way clothes embrace you. Driving over, I rehearsed neutral topics in my mind. Emily's school, volunteer, work, the flowers beginning to bloom in my garden. Safe subjects, things without edges. The townhouse stood clean-lined and poised in a row of identical homes, the front porch light already glowing in the falling dusk. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock, one hand resting lightly on the frame. "Sophia," she said, a polite nod with that trained smile. She was stunning, of course. Hair swept up into a neat twist, a silk blouse the color of champagne, gold earrings catching the light. She didn't move to hug me, but Daniel appeared behind her with a grin and pulled me into a brief embrace that smelled faintly of his aftershave. "Come in, Mum," he said, taking the tart from my hands. "Smells incredible." Inside, the dining table was already set. White plates so thin they almost glowed. Tall wine glasses sparkling under the warm light of 3 tapered candles. In the center was a single ivory orchid in a small glass vase, and beyond it, a bottle of wine with a label I didn't recognize, but knew at a glance was expensive. We sat, Rebecca at one end, Daniel at the other, me to Daniel's right. Dinner began gently, polite questions about how I'd been, updates about Emily's art project for school. We shared roasted salmon, delicate asparagus spears, and herbed potatoes arranged so perfectly, it felt like a restaurant plate. For a while, I let myself pretend that we were simply a family sharing dinner, that there was no careful distance to mind, no undercurrent to avoid. But after the second glass of wine was poured, something shifted in the air. It was so subtle at first, a slight narrowing of Rebecca's eyes when I mentioned a new program at the community center where I volunteered. "That sounds quaint," she said, her tone stretched thin. She gave a small smile that didn't quite cover the glint there. "So, you're still doing that? Volunteering, I mean?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice light. "Twice a week. I help with meal prep and mentoring for the teens." "How sweet," she interrupted, her fingers swirling the stem of her wine glass. "A shame you never, I don't know, expanded into something bigger with all that time. You always did have time, didn't you?" Her words found their way under my skin with surprising speed. Time. She said it like it was some luxurious resource I had squandered. My time had been spent paying for her husband's education, keeping a roof over our heads, and working my fingertips raw in a kitchen when the alternative was losing everything after Peter died. But I swallowed it back. I smiled faintly, not trusting myself to say more. The next moment, she leaned back, smiling in that effortless, hostess way that seemed to always also test the air for weakness. Then she said it. "How does it feel to be?" A tiny pause, a tilt of her head. "Well, something of a loser, compared to what you could have been." The sound in the room seemed to die right there. The faint clink of cutlery stopped. The candle flames burned steady. I felt Daniel shift. In his seat beside me, I looked at him, half expecting, half hoping, to see outrage or defense in his face. But all I saw was discomfort, his gaze drifting down, hands folding together on the tablecloth. My heart pounded, but not from humiliation, from realization. I had known Rebecca's opinions of me for years. They had been spoken between lines, tucked in the corners of remarks. But this was a neat little dagger placed right in the center of the table. I met her eyes. I could have told her about the nights I worked through until dawn, so Daniel could stay in school. I could have told her about the weeks I'd eaten buttered toast for dinner, so the mortgage could be paid on time. I could have told her that loser is not the word for someone who made sure her son never once went to bed hungry or hopeless. Instead, something steady arose in me. I smiled. Not a smile of amusement or dismissal. A smile that felt like the lifting of a curtain inside my chest, revealing something unmovable. And then, in a voice even but certain, I said, I suppose it feels a lot like keeping a family fed, warm, and supported while others have the luxury of thinking they did it all themselves. The color in her cheeks changed. It wasn't much, just a flush that crept high. Daniel's fork clinked softly against his plate, but he didn't speak. Rebecca's eyes held mine for a long moment before she reached for her wine again. Well, she said, that's one way to look at it. We finished the rest of the meal in a genteel quiet, the kind that is both polite and brittle. The candles burned lower, and in their glow I could almost see in sharp relief what had been building for years. That night, when I finally closed my front door behind me, I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, still holding my coat instead of hanging it up. The house smelled faintly of apples and cinnamon from the extra tart I'd left cooling. In the kitchen, I thought maybe I'd carve myself a slice when I got home, as a small comfort after the evening. But instead, I just stood there in the quiet, coat in hand, the warmth of Daniel's home replaced by the cool, echoing air of my own. It's strange. My heart wasn't beating fast from anger. I wasn't shaking from rage. I was still in the way you feel when something you've suspected for a long time is finally confirmed in full daylight. There's a part of you that grieves, and another part that just nods and says, I knew it. Rebecca's words. How does it feel to be a loser? Didn't rattle around in my head the way cruel words sometimes do. They settled, heavy and unmoving, because they weren't really new. She'd been telling me what she thought of me for years, just in smaller doses. This was simply the first time she'd said it without disguising it. What struck me more deeply was Daniel's silence. Not just in that moment, but in every moment, like it, that had come before. I placed my coat on the back of a chair and went to the kitchen. The tart sat there, golden and perfect, just as I had fussed over it that morning. I slid it under a glass dome and pushed it back from the counter. I didn't have the appetite. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the small table by the window, the one where Peter and I used to drink coffee together on Sunday mornings. I stared at the frost, beginning to trace the edges of the glass outside, and thought about the pattern of my life since Peter died. Always reaching for Daniel, always bending toward his comfort, always explaining myself in ways that I hoped would make him see me, not just as his mother, but as a person worth his respect. And yet, over the years, I'd learned something quietly. People who want to understand you will make room to understand. Those who don't, won't, no matter what you hand them. I sipped my water and let the truth settle. Daniel had, in many ways, chosen Rebecca's view of me over mine. And maybe that was easier for him. Maybe it made him feel more independent. Maybe it saved him from having to untangle the complexity of a mother's sacrifices and her flaws. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But alongside the hurt, there was a strange, unexpected clarity. The kind that shows you the outlines of your own cage. For so many years, I had been auditioning for their approval. That was the word that came to mind, auditioning. Always performing some version of the mother or grandmother I thought they wanted. Perfectly accommodating. never making waves, laughing off the slights. And what had that earned me? An open insult across a candlelit table and the quiet compliance of my own child. That was the night I decided there would be no more auditions. The decision wasn't theatrical. There was no vow shouted to the ceiling. It was just there. Like a stone in my hand, I had finally decided to set down. I would still see Emily, sweet Emily, who ran into my arms with her school projects and pictures. As often as possible, I would still be kind, still offer warmth and stability when I was with them, and I would stop chasing invitations that were never truly offered in good faith. I would stop proving my worth to people who had already decided how small I should look in their eyes. If they saw me as a loser, so be it. That was a reflection of their limits, not mine. Over the weeks that followed, I noticed the shift in myself. If 2 weeks went by without an invitation, I didn't rush to text Daniel first. When Rebecca delivered one of her polite but pointed remarks, I smiled, truly smiled, and let the silence afterward do its work. I spoke when I had something worth saying, not to fill the space or please anyone. Rebecca didn't press me again after that dinner. Whether she respected the boundary or simply found it less interesting to poke at me, I don't know. But I felt something new. I was no longer standing on their porch, waiting to be let in. I was living in my own home, fully. One Saturday, Emily came over to spend the afternoon. We baked an apple tart together in my kitchen. She cracked eggs with intense concentration, her little brow furrowing, tongue caught between her teeth, the way Daniel's used to when he was her age. Flour dusted her hair by the time we slid the tart into the oven. When it was done, we sat at the table with our slices, steam curling up from the warm fruit. Emily took her first bite, her eyes wide. "Grandma," she said, bold and certain in the way only a child can be, "you're the best cook in the whole world." I laughed, really laughed, and reached across the table to squeeze her small hand. Her words warmed me far more than the tart ever could, not because I needed praise, but because they came from a place untouched by judgment. Children see you as you are, not as you're supposed to be. In that moment, I thought, this is enough. My worth isn't measured by Rebecca's logic, nor by my son's silence. It lives here, in the home I've kept open, in the work I've done with my hands, and in the love I can still give freely without bargaining for it in return. That's how it feels, not to be a loser, not in the way Rebecca meant, but to be me, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who made a life in the space between griefs. And I just smiled, even at the memory of it, because I knew now that my value was never and would never be hers to decide.